The asylum's whisper in the heart of a desolate town, shrouded in fog and forgotten by time, stood the Greystone Asylum. Its towering, Gothic structure loomed ominously against the overcast sky, the windows like hollow eyes watching the world with a sinister gaze. For decades, it had been a refuge for the mentally ill, but whispers of dark experiments and sinister practices had turned it into a place of fear. David Harper was a man who had always prided himself on his rationality. A schoolteacher by profession, he had lived a quiet life until the day he began to hear voices, soft, insistent murmurs that gnawed at the edges of his sanity. When he finally succumbed to the pressure and sought help, he found himself committed to Greystone, a decision he would soon come to regret. Upon his arrival, David was greeted by the cold, sterile environment of the asylum. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the distant echoes of laughter and screams that seemed to seep through the walls. The staff, clad in white uniforms that made them appear more like ghosts than caregivers, guided him through the labyrinthine corridors. He noticed the patients hollow-eyed and twitching who wandered aimlessly, their minds lost to the shadows of their own thoughts. As days turned into weeks, David's initial fears morphed into a creeping dread. He learned that the asylum was not merely a place of care. It was a laboratory for psychological experimentation. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about progress and breakthroughs, their eyes gleaming with a fanaticism that sent chills down his spine. They were not there to heal, they were there to dissect the human mind. One evening, as David sat in the common room surrounded by other patients, he overheard a conversation between two nurses. They spoke of a new treatment. They were trying a method that involved isolating patients in dark rooms, subjecting them to sensory deprivation until they lost all sense of reality. The thought sent a shiver through him. He knew he had to escape before he became another victim of their twisted experiments. But escape was not easy. The asylum was heavily guarded, and the patients were not just passive souls. Many had succumbed to madness, their minds warped beyond recognition. David soon realized that some of them were aware of his intentions. They would watch him with hungry eyes, whispering among themselves in hushed tones that sent a wave of paranoia crashing over him. One night, as he lay in his small, sterile cell, David heard a soft, scratching sound outside his door. He held his breath, listening intently as the noise grew louder. It was followed by a low giggle, high-pitched and disconcerting. Suddenly, the door creaked open, revealing a figure cloaked in shadows. It was one of the patients, a woman with wild hair and eyes that gleamed with madness. "Help us," she whispered, her voice trembling with urgency. "They're coming for you." Before David could respond, she darted away down the hall, her laughter echoing off the walls like a haunting melody. Driven by instinct and desperation, he followed her into the darkness. The corridors twisted and turned like a living maze, each corner revealing more horrors than the last. He stumbled upon rooms filled with patients locked away in cages, their eyes wide with terror as they clawed at the bars. The stench of fear hung heavy in the air as David pressed on, guided only by the fading sound of the woman's laughter. Finally, he reached a room where a flickering light spilled out from under the door. Heart pounding in his chest, he pushed it open to reveal a group of patients gathered around an old television set, their faces illuminated by its eerie glow. On screen played disturbing images, flashes of distorted faces and chaotic scenes that seemed to reach into their very souls. "Join us," one patient beckoned with a crazed smile. "We're free here." David felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over him as he realized they were not free. They were prisoners of their own minds, trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. The woman who had led him here stood at his side now, her expression shifting from urgency to something darker. "They want you," she said softly, her eyes narrowing as if she could see into his very essence. "They need your mind." Before he could react, The door slammed shut behind him, trapping him in the room with these deranged souls. Panic surged through him as he backed away from their hungry gazes, but there was nowhere to run. The walls seemed to close in around him as whispers filled the air, frantic voices, overlapping in a cacophony of madness. "Join us, become one of us." David's mind raced as he fought against the tide of insanity, threatening to engulf him. He remembered snippets of his life outside, his students' laughter, the warmth of sunlight on his face, but those memories felt distant now, fading like ghosts. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently before plunging them into darkness. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, wrapping around him like tendrils of smoke. He could feel their presence closing in, their madness infecting his thoughts. In that moment of despair, David caught sight of a window at the far end of the room. It was small, but open just enough for him to squeeze through. Fueled by adrenaline and desperation, he lunged toward it, ignoring the hands reaching out to pull him back into the abyss. As he clambered through the opening and fell onto the cold ground outside, he gasped for breath. The night air was sharp against his skin as he scrambled to his feet and ran into the surrounding woods. Behind him, he could hear their cries echoing through the night, lost souls calling for him to return. But as he fled deeper into the forest, David realized that while he had escaped Greystone physically, its grip on his mind had only just begun to tighten. He could still hear their whispers in his head, soft and seductive, promising freedom from pain. If only he would join them. And no matter how far he ran or how fast he tried to escape, those voices would follow him into the depths of his own psyche. Days turned into nights as David wandered through the woods, lost and disoriented. The line between reality and illusion blurred as memories of Greystone haunted him relentlessly. He could feel their presence lurking just beyond his vision, shadows flitting between trees, and whispers carried on the wind. It wasn't long before exhaustion took hold. David collapsed against a tree trunk, gasping for breath as panic clawed at his chest. He closed his eyes tightly, willing himself to wake up from this nightmare, but when he opened them again, he found himself back at the asylum's gates. The towering structure loomed before him once more, its windows glinting like malevolent eyes in the moonlight. He could hear laughter echoing within its walls, a chilling reminder that some doors could never truly be closed. And so David stood at the threshold of Greystone Asylum once more, caught in a web woven by madness, itself a prisoner not only of its walls, but also of his own unraveling mind. The whispers grew louder as he hesitated at the entrance. They were calling him home. To be continued. The asylum's whisper. Part E. David stood frozen at the gates of Greystone Asylum, the weight of his decision heavy on his shoulders. The laughter echoed in his ears, a siren's call that promised both solace and despair. He could feel the pull of the place, an invisible thread drawing him back into its depths. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, crossing the threshold once more. The familiar chill enveloped him, wrapping around him like a shroud. As he walked through the entrance, memories flooded back, scenes of terror and madness that had haunted him since his escape. But there was something different. This time, he felt a strange sense of acceptance, as if he had finally come to terms with the darkness that lurked within. The corridors were just as he remembered them, cold, sterile, and lined with doors that concealed untold horrors. Yet now, instead of fear, he felt a strange curiosity. What was it about this place that had captivated him? Why had he returned? As he wandered deeper into the asylum, he caught glimpses of familiar faces, patients who had once seemed lost, but now wore expressions of eerie calm. They moved with a grace that belied their madness, whispering secrets to one another as if they shared a bond that transcended sanity. David felt drawn to them, compelled to understand the connection they shared. He found himself in the common room again, where the old television flickered with static. The patients gathered around it, their eyes glazed over in a trance-like state. They turned to him as one, their expressions shifting from surprise to something akin to welcome. "Join us," the woman with wild hair said again, her voice soothing yet laced with an unsettling edge. "We found peace here." David hesitated, uncertainty gnawing at him. He could feel the whispers in his mind growing stronger, intertwining with his thoughts like vines choking a tree. But beneath that chaos lay a strange allure, a promise of understanding and acceptance that he had never known outside these walls. "What do I have to do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Embrace it," another patient replied, their eyes shining with fervor. "Let go of your fears and join us in the truth. The world beyond is a lie here. We are free." As they beckoned him closer, David felt a surge of desperation and hope. Perhaps this was his chance to escape the torment of his own mind, to become one with those who had accepted their fate. He stepped forward, feeling the warmth of their presence enveloping him like a comforting embrace. But as he crossed the threshold into their circle, a flash of clarity struck him. He remembered the pain, the fear, and the isolation that had driven him to seek help in the first place. These were not the answers he sought, they were chains disguised as freedom. "No!" he shouted, shaking his head violently as if to dispel the fog clouding his thoughts. "I won't be trapped here." The patients recoiled as if struck, their expressions shifting from welcoming to predatory. The laughter turned sinister, echoing off the walls like a cacophony of lost souls. "You can't escape," they cried in unison, their voices rising in pitch. "You belong to us now." Panic surged through David as he turned to flee. The corridors twisted and turned like a living maze, each step echoing with the relentless pursuit of those who had once seemed inviting, but now appeared monstrous. He dashed through darkened hallways, heart pounding in his chest as he searched for an exit. The whispers grew louder, clawing at his sanity as shadows danced at the edges of his vision. Just when he thought he would be consumed by them, he spotted a flickering light ahead, a doorway that promised freedom. With every ounce of strength left in him, David sprinted toward it. He burst through the door and into the night air outside, gasping for breath as he stumbled into the moonlit clearing beyond the asylum's walls. But as he looked back at Greystone, he realized it was not just a building, it was a part of him now. The whispers still echoed in his mind, a haunting reminder that some battles could never truly be won. David knew he could never return to life as it was before. Greystone would always linger in his thoughts like a shadow refusing to fade. But as he stood in the moonlight, he also understood that he had a choice: to fight against the darkness or to succumb to it. With resolve hardening in his chest, David turned away from the asylum for good. He would seek help not just for himself, but for those still trapped within its walls. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but he was determined to reclaim his life. As he walked into the night, leaving Greystone behind him, David felt a flicker of hope igniting within, a reminder that even in darkness, there was always a path toward light.